So there were enough requests for it, so here we go. Predators in Dragon Ball. Funny thing is, while Xenomorphs scale quite well into Dragon Ball because of their biology, Predators don't. Well, they could conceivably access Ki in this universe if you really wanted them to, and they'd basically just be fighting like normal Dragon Ball villains, which loses the thing I find most interesting about the Predator. So while the Yujuta we'll see in this story are scaled to be a threat to our characters, don't expect any beam struggles. Instead, this is a story that will focus more on the Predator's thematic weight and what that introduces to the world of Dragon Ball. All that being said, let's start the story. Planet Vegeta is gone. Wiped out by a meteor. Or so the story goes. The Saiyan survivors have been unable to get many details about the event from the Frieza Force. Not that they've had much time. With the Saiyan backbone of the Frieza Force now wiped out, the entire army is forced to pick up the slack and keep things running. There were plenty of warriors, but there was a distinct lack of quality that Planet Vegeta provided. The Saiyan survivors, however, didn't mind the extra workload. That was something they even thrived at. The crew of 5 Saiyans led by their surviving prince tore through worlds like they were nothing. And that was the problem for Vegeta. These worlds were nothing. For the survivors of the greatest warrior race the universe had ever known, they were being put up against the weakest worlds possible. This latest planet they'd been sent out to eradicate proved no different.
Vegeta, what does the scouter say about their power levels?
Pathetic. They hardly even register, just like the last world and the one before that. There's no challenge here.
Well, that's great. Easy work for us to take care of and move right on.
Vegeta shot Raditz a glare. His contempt for the 3 low-class Saiyans he'd been stuck with for the last year had begun to reach its peak.
Of course you think that, Raditz. Low-class trash like you are content to just punch down and collect treats like a pet of Frieza. If you were a true Saiyan, you'd be aching for a challenge. Frieza has us spending more time sleeping in space travel than fighting. It's making us soft.
The prince was harsh with his underlings. But he wasn't wrong. Frieza had been keeping any kind of challenging assignments far away from the Saiyans. For what purpose remained unknown. Vegeta directed his men to land, telling them not to make a move without his approval. On their way down, Pepa, one of the other 2 Saiyans on the team, established a private line to Raditz's scouter.
Don't worry about His Highness, kid. You're right. A challenge is great in a fight and all, but only the crazy Saiyans go out of their way to make a challenge. Keep your head down and your mouth shut around the elites, okay? Yes, sir.
The troop of Saiyans began to walk around the jungles of this new planet. Vegeta and Nappa several paces ahead of the rest. Nappa questioned what they were looking for, but Vegeta didn't respond. The young prince had a feeling about this planet. He needed to see what its inhabitants were like. They moved through the brush and then found a small team of creatures. These were the Yujuta. Vegeta immediately recognized them by their tendrils growing out of the back of their heads, as mentioned in the Planet Bounty report. For a moment, the prince wondered what they were doing out in the jungle, but then a scene played out that made things all too clear. One of the Yujuta raised up an arm, and off of it shot a long metal cord. A roar of pain sounded all around them as the cord hit its target hidden in the bush. The team of Yujuta began to reel in the metal cord, and out from the thicket, another Yujuta appeared. Harpooned on the end of the line, it fought and clawed to try and escape, but the fight was pointless. It was obvious this was the end of something, but the Saiyans looking on were not sure what. The captured creature was brought to its knees before the others as they began to circle it. The smallest of the party stepped forward. It removed a mask and unveiled massive mandibles covering its mouth. With a mighty roar, it extended a wrist blade, and in a brutal display, it punctured the throat of the creature before it. Then, with its free hand, it braced the shoulder of the dying creature and pulled with all its might to remove the skull and spinal cord of the now deceased beast. The other Yujuta gathered round the smallest one. They waved their weapons in the air and roared in celebration. The Saiyan prince looked on in admiration. These weak creatures were something special. They were
predators.
In an instant, it all clicked for him. What they just witnessed was the end of a hunt. The stronger specimens of the species had tracked down and killed a weakling. The prince was fascinated, his mind wrapped around these predators. In what came as a surprise, even to himself, Vegeta felt a respect grow within him. According to the scouter, they were weak, but to his eyes, the predator had something he hadn't seen since his planet was destroyed. Pride. The prince then had a thought.
I'm sick of being around weakling Saiyans. Nappa's the only one of you who's worth a damn in my eyes, and even then, you're all getting soft. So if Frieza refuses to give us a challenge, we'll make one.
What do you mean, sir?
No blasts, no flying, no faster than the eye's speed. None of that. We shouldn't need it. These Yujuta are predators. We're going to allow them to hunt us on their terms, and we're going to test ourselves. All of you are going to make it back to the ships on your own without relying on energy, or you're not going to make it back at all. Is that understood?
You sure about that, boss? We're the only Saiyans left, after all.
Are you questioning me, Nappa?
I love this idea! What a great way to test ourselves!
Of the troop, only Vegeta was enthused. Nappa would play along like always. Pepa and Pinter were concerned, but figured they could manage. After all, the scouter readings here were nothing to be worried about. They could push through this with a moderate experience under their belts. But Raditz was terrified. He was easily the weakest among them. The prince had made it very clear several times since the destruction of their home he wanted nothing to do with them. Vegeta and Nappa, on pure base strength alone, could handle this. There was little doubt of that. But Raditz, he could die. Without accessing his ki, Raditz's power would be below the readings they were getting from the predators. Raditz started to speak up to try and convince Vegeta this wouldn't be a good idea, that it would upset Frieza if they wasted too much time. But before the first word could leave his mouth, Vegeta was holding a ball of energy in his hand, and he shot it into the air, where it let loose a massive explosion. The sky turned purple for an instant, then red as the jungle canopy caught on fire. Raditz stared up at the burning trees, shocked by the output Vegeta just registered on his scouter. He didn't notice as the prince and Nappa sprang off into the jungle bush, moving on muscle alone, not enhancing their speed. Raditz's attention was reclaimed on the present when he heard a cacophony of mighty roars from the predators. Pepa grabbed the young Saiyan's arm and helped him keep pace with the rest of the troop. It didn't take long before the three low-class warriors caught up with their elite counterparts. After running in chaotic patterns for a bit, Vegeta brought them all to a stop.
Why are we stopping? Shouldn't we be moving towards the ships? The scouter says they're getting closer.
You're so pathetic. This isn't a race, it's a challenge. Can't you feel your blood pump? When was the last time you had even an inkling of that? And just from a run. Know what, Raditz? Just to make sure you don't behave like the coward you are, I'm altering the rules. No scouters.
The troop took off their scouters and laid them on the ground. Vegeta left his on, so he could tell if any of them used ki, then continued.
Now it's not just about getting back to the ships. Each of you, claim a trophy. These predators like to collect heads, so do that. Bring a head back to the ship with you or stay here. Now split up. Let's make this interesting.
The Saiyans scattered into the jungle in different directions. Mere moments later, the hunting party burst onto the scene, where they had just gathered. The prey they were hunting had broken off. that much was obvious from their tracks. So the hunting party broke up as well. The youngest and his father went after the biggest set of tracks. Individuals pursued the rest, and the elder of the party inspected the devices left behind by their prey. Nappa was the first to be tracked down. He was the biggest of the prey and moved the slowest, but that wasn't a concern for the British Saiyan. He went along with Vegeta's idea because he did miss the challenges of the old days. The little prince was shaping up to be a mighty Saiyan warrior, and something like this was proof of that. The father and son predators closed in on Nappa. He closed his eyes and listened to them stalk forward. They scanned the Saiyan and saw that he was unarmed. By their code of honor, the father approached without weapons. Nappa sized him up and laughed.
You're coming at me and you're not even gonna use one of those blades. Mistake.
The two began to grapple in combat. The might of the Predator was great, but even without tapping into his reserves of power, Nappa was a wall of muscle. With ease, he lifted the Predator and slammed him to the ground. Laughing, Nappa leaped into the air and put all the force he could into his elbow, slamming on the Predator's chest and breaking its collarbone. With his gigantic hand, Nappa seized the Predator's jaw and pulled hard and fast, ripping the head from its body. All the while, the freshly blooded Predator watched on. It roared with rage and abandoned any honor. Deploying its wrist blades, it charged at Nappa. The brute laughed as he dodged the blades.
Now we're talking!
The blades kept Nappa at bay for a short while, but the new-blooded Predator was too mad and still far too great at a disadvantage to last long. With a crack to the top of the head, Nappa sent his opponent to the ground and claimed a second trophy. The three low-class Saiyans, however, did not have things as easy. They shared a look during Vegeta's last little tirade. Unspoken, each of the low-class warriors knew to only split up for a moment, but to try and meet back up once they had some distance from the prince and his mad dog Nappa. While they were stronger in numbers, this worked against them under the rules of engagement. They couldn't use ki, but their numbers prompted the hunting party members tracking the trio to use more distance-based methods of attack. While the trio were busy discussing their plan to get trophies without alerting Vegeta's scouter, a large metal net shot out from the bush and held Pepa around the base of a tree. Raditz ran over to him and began to pull at the net with all his might, but a wrench began to screech as the metal net tightened around the Saiyan. It was being pushed to its limits, but Peppa's skin began to split under the pressure. Pinter started to run over to help, but a disc-like blade shot out from the darkness of the jungle and cut clear through his neck. The Saiyan dropped to his knees, the shock from which caused his head to fall off of his neck before the rest of his body hit the ground.
No! Enough of this! I'm a Saiyan, I will not be killed like some weakling!
With a burst of energy, Pepa demolished the net closing around him. He rose to his feet and began to charge a beam in his hand. Raditz stood behind the older Saiyan and kept his eyes on the woods where the disc came from. Elsewhere in the jungle, Vegeta stopped in his tracks when he saw the scouter go off. From the size of the energy reading, he was certain it was one of his troop. While his infamous temper shot up for a moment, it was calmed by a wicked smile. He lifted his boot and slammed it into the dirt, ensuring that whatever creature was tracking him would find this spot. But first he had to go dispense some discipline. Vegeta shot off of the ground, rose high above the jungle canopy. At top speed, he could reach the energy reading in seconds. Raditz kept his eye on the jungle darkness, looking for any sign of movement. But then a bright red beam caught his eye. Raditz looked over and saw a red triangle appear on Pepa. It then began to track up his body. Raditz followed the red light and saw it came from the darkness. Before he had time to voice the thought that entered his head, a blue energy blast shot out from the darkness of the jungle. Pepa, however, just managed to notice it in time and shot it midair, detonating the blast.
Ha! Your pathetic weapons are no match for a Saiyan's true power!
Pepa stood with confidence as he shot a blast off into the jungle. He hit his target directly. One of the 3 predators roared in pain as it fell from the treetops. Dead. Pepa readied another blast, but stopped as he looked up and saw Vegeta floating in the air.
You disobeyed a direct order from your commanding officer, from your prince. You aren't worthy to call yourself a Saiyan.
And with a glare, Pepa burst from the inside out. Raditz didn't even have time to shield himself and wound up covered in the only thing left of Pepa. His blood. Blue beams shot up in the air at Vegeta. He casually dodged them and looked down at the mortified Raditz.
These 2 are yours to deal with now, Raditz. I hope you learn from what you've just seen. Prove your Saiyan blood to me, Raditz. You weak, pathetic worm.
With that, Vegeta flew back to where he'd been before the scouter report. Elsewhere in the jungle, the Elder Predator carefully watched the readings from the scouter he'd picked up earlier. He began to understand what the device did. To test its theory, it got a read on itself. Though he did not understand the figures on the screen, the number of digits of disparity between the readings shocked him to the core. With a proper sense of what it was dealing with, the Elder began to use its own knowledge of tracking in tandem with the scouter, and started to close in on the highest reading. The size of its tracks causing some concern within the experienced predator. Raditz, however, was left alone in the jungle. He quaked in his boots as the 2 veteran predators emerged from the bush. Being that the Saiyan was now alone and had not run, they were honor-bound to attack directly. But after seeing what the adult was capable of, they readied weapons as they closed in on the young warrior. One veteran held a maul and began to swing it as it warmed up and closed in. The other extended its wrist blades out to their full length. The 2 veterans made a clicking noise with their mouths as they circled around the young Saiyan. Raditz felt his chest catch on fire. He raised his arms and prepared to do the only thing he knew he could. Vegeta, however, began to grow impatient. He'd continued running once he regained his place on the ground, but nothing was happening. He began to wonder if whatever was hunting the others had ignored him. That thought sparked the prince's temper. He was the greatest of the Saiyans, living and dead, and he would not be denied a challenge he'd gone to such great lengths to create. But as the prince began to think of doing something destructive, he was snapped back to the present by a large metal spear. He only just caught sight of it flying through the air straight to his head. If he hadn't ducked out of the way, it would have hit it right between his eyes. The prince looked in the direction the spear came from, but had to dodge again as 2 blue beams of energy shot toward him. Vegeta grinned. The Elder closed in on his target, and was shocked to see the scouter had led him to a mere child. He had started to doubt his understanding of this strange technology, but the speed with which the child had managed to dodge his combi stick, and the double blast of his plasma caster suddenly confirmed his theory. This child was one thing above all else: dangerous. Raditz ducked out of the way of a slice from one veteran's maul. He scampered across the ground in order to avoid the wrist blades of the other predator. Raditz was now doing the only thing he could. He was running. Like a monkey, the boy scampered up a nearby tree, hoping that the veterans hunting him wouldn't be able to follow. That hope was in vain. The predators collapsed and holstered their weapons. Then they extended their claws and began to scale the tree after the boy. If this wasn't enough to terrify Raditz, he suddenly heard the voice of Vegeta again. This time it was muffled, as if recorded.
Raditz, you weak, pathetic worm. Raditz, weak, pathetic.
Vegeta began to feel his heart race. He was even sweating. Having to move like this, limiting himself to pure muscle, was exhilarating. He kept dodging the blue blasts of the plasma from the Elder Predator. They were coming so quickly that he was able to determine their origin point. He wasn't going to just play dodge all day, though. He needed a trophy. So Vegeta picked up a rock from the jungle floor and shot it like a dart in the direction of his attacker. The rock hit the Elder Predator in the upper shoulder, throwing off his last blast from the plasma caster. It shot up into the jungle canopy and sparked a fire above their heads.
What's wrong? I thought you beasts were worth something. Don't tell me you're just going to try and fire pot shots at me all night. Come on out. Let's have a challenge.
Vegeta taunted as he ripped the combi stick from the tree he'd been sitting against. The prince never held a spear before. He thought it might just be fun. The Elder didn't need to understand Vegeta's words to see he was being challenged directly, and that was something he was honor-bound to meet. The plasma caster was useless, and this being standing before him possessed great power. It was all too clear he wasn't using it on purpose. The Elder understood that. Few Yajuta had enough experience to go out on the hunt without the full assortment of technology and weaponry their clans become used to. But this Elder, this one did. It recognized the look in its prey's eyes. The look of a killer holding back to heighten the challenge. The Elder stepped out of the jungle into the light of the burning canopy. It threw down the plasma caster along with most of its arsenal of weaponry, spare for his shiv cutter, a bladed whip made from the tail of a xenomorph. Finally, it threw the scouter toward Vegeta's feet, then removed his biomask. With a mighty roar, the Elder extended his mandibles and raised the shiv cutter, ready for combat.
You are one ugly motherfucker.
Back across the jungle, Raditz kept jumping between trees. Fleeing from his dual threats, he had no real plan in mind. Maybe if he could escape without using ki, he could circle back, reclaim a scouter, wait for Vegeta to leave him behind, and then... What? He wasn't strong enough to kill an entire planet on his own. Even if he could fully utilize his ki, he was the weakest of the Saiyans, and his fear of Vegeta was forcing him to be weaker than that. Raditz jumped and grabbed for another branch, trying to keep his distance from the predators, but a shuriken disc shot ahead of him and cleaved the branch just as Raditz began to swing from it. He plummeted toward the ground, but luckily his tail shot out and saved him as it clung to a lower branch. Raditz safely dropped to the ground and began to run on foot. The predators continued to follow. The young Saiyan managed to gain some distance, but his heart sank as before him there was no longer jungle cover. He'd run into a large clearing, a valley of tall grass. He tried to turn and run back into the jungle. There he had cover and could hide in the trees, but the predators were too close behind him. A spear shot toward him, narrowly missing. Raditz ran into the field since he had no other choice. Vegeta, on the other hand, had engaged the Elder in combat and was thrilled. His strength easily outmatched the Elder, but a slight slip-up demonstrated that the Shiv Cutter Whip was made from a material sharp enough to draw blood from a Saiyan. Something that normally would have upset the prince now gave him excitement. There was a real danger here. Any mistake and he could be hurt. This was a fight. The whip was also a perfect weapon choice on the part of the Elder. It allowed him to keep distance while attacking, negating Vegeta's greater power quite well. However, the boy's speed was still a concern. The Elder Predator had to be relentless with its attacks, making each strike flow into the next seamlessly. Any opening would allow Vegeta all the time he needed to strike a fatal blow with the combi stick. The battle was far from an even match. But all the Elder required was one lucky blow. If he could land a strike in a vital spot, he may just have a chance. The Predator struck out with the Shiv Cutter again, but Vegeta was a quick learner. Saiyans had a natural talent for all combat, and though he'd never held a spear before, the Prince of Saiyans quickly learned how to use it expertly. He extended the combi stick at just the right moment and caught the Shiv Cutter, wrapping around the pole. Before the Elder had time to pull back, Vegeta plunged the combi stick into the ground, pinning the bladed whip to the weapon. The Elder had no chance to unravel the Shiv Cutter because Vegeta was in front of him and delivered a devastating blow to the stomach of the Predator. Raditz scampered through the tall grass of the valley, dodging and weaving on pure instinct to avoid the spears launched by the Predators in the distance, until one managed to catch the shoulder pad of his armor and pin him to the ground. Raditz frantically pawed and grabbed at the spear, but it was covered in barbs. He couldn't even touch the thing without cutting his hands. He was too weak to even remove the simple metal spike without relying on his deeper reserves.
Vegeta was right. I am weak.
The veteran Predators approached the young Saiyan. They were still cautious given the dramatic display from the adult when it was cornered, but this child was clearly on a lower level. They were actually grateful it provided such a strong chase. The child's tail had made it particularly adept at navigating the jungle canopy, but once it was out in this open field beneath the clear night sky, all advantages were lost. The Predator, whose spear had managed to pin the Saiyan to the ground, unleashed its wrist blades again and moved in for the kill. Vegeta also was ready to wrap things up. He stepped on the leg of the Elder Predator to savor the moment just a tad longer. Knowing he was defeated, the Elder began to tap at its wrist.
Another weapon? No, I think we're done with those. I've a trophy to collect.
The Saiyan Prince grabbed the throat of his prey and with ease ripped the Predator's head away from the rest of the body, bringing the spinal column along the way. He smirked with pride at the accomplishment. It was a fun way to spend the evening. But then something else caught his eye. The Predator's wrist was beeping. Vegeta took a closer look and saw strange symbols fill the device, until they started to vanish one by one. The prince realized what was happening in an instant and dropped his trophy. Quickly, he grabbed the Predator's arm in his hands and used his foot to brace against the body. He ripped the arm loose from the corpse and was showered in a glowing green blood as he flung the arm off into the sky. Vegeta quickly picked up his trophy and bolted in the opposite direction. A massive blue explosion lit up the night sky. Vegeta laughed as he slowed down to a calm walk back towards the ship.
Nice try, but it'll take more than a bomb to stop the most powerful warrior in the galaxy.
The two Predators that were after Raditz, however, paused to look at the sky. Surprised by the explosion in the distance, Raditz took his eyes off the beast before him, and he looked up too. But his focus wasn't on the explosion. Something else caught his eye. He couldn't believe it took him this long to notice, but beyond the tree line, in the sky, big and beautiful in the clear night, was the full moon. He had missed it because he'd been running in the opposite direction for so long. Raditz opened his eyes wide and took in the Blutz waves. He didn't have nearly the control Vegeta did. He couldn't even manifest ki blasts in it yet. But Bardock had taught him one thing about becoming an Uzaru. Keep your mind focused on one goal before transformation, and you will do it.
Rip their heads off. Rip their heads off. Rip their heads off!
Before the Predators knew what was happening, Raditz was transforming in front of them. The small Saiyan had grown to dwarf them in mere seconds and was still expanding. Soon the mighty Uzaru stood before them and let loose a roar. The Predators tried to bring it down, but their weapons couldn't pierce Raditz's hide. They began to blast away with their plasma casters. One even managed to hit near an eye, but this just angered the great ape. In one sweeping motion, Raditz scooped up the predators in a giant fist, and with a clear directive in his mind, brought his other hand over with precision rarely seen in Uzaru, ripping the heads off of his foes. Raditz raised the heads of the predators up to the night sky, and roared with a pride buried deep within himself. Vegeta saw his scouter spike and began to fume at being disobeyed yet again. But then the thought of finally killing that weakling Raditz eased his mind as he flew off in the direction of the reading. Quickly arrived in the valley and saw Raditz stomping around. Briefly, the Uzaru even tried to take a swipe at the prince. Vegeta glanced up at the night sky and quickly looked away when he caught a sliver of the full moon, not wishing to transform too. Raditz may not have used a false moon to achieve this transformation, but Vegeta was still skeptical about whether or not it should count. But as he watched Raditz wildly try to swipe at him, you could tell it was all brute force behind the swings. Raditz had managed to tap into his Saiyan strength, and do so without breaking Vegeta's rules.
Fine, I'm satisfied.
With that, Vegeta blew up the planet's moon, and used his remote to bring the ships to their location. Nappa sat in his pod with his 2 trophies.
What kept you? I was getting bored.
That's your own fault, Nappa. You could have played with your prey for longer.
So, Raditz actually did it, huh?
It took transforming into something that's meant to destroy planets for him to win. But yes, how pathetic. Load him and the trophies into the pods. The other 2 are dead. We're better off without those weaklings anyway.
Sure thing, boss.
The Saiyans left the planet. Vegeta reported it to Frieza that his men had done too much damage to its surface for it to be salvageable, but that he'd killed the 2 responsible. He planned to come back someday, and didn't want to see these predators wiped out. And that's all she wrote. Or he wrote, because I wrote it, and I'm a manly man. Just want to thank everyone who helped out making this. I hope everyone really enjoyed the story. I want to thank the voice actors, of course, who just really helped bring it to life so much. Please go look them up, look into them, check out their stuff. Links in descriptions, as always. If you want to support more stories and one-offs like this, please go check us out on Patreon. Anyway, until next time, have fun, geeks.